Pirkei Avot, Pirkei Mishnah Zayin. Shiva dvorim b'goyim, v'shiva b'chocham. There are 7 attributes to a goyim, and 7 to a chocham. And the Tana continues, chocham mina medabra b'fnei mishu goyim mina b'chocham v'minyan. The Tana lists the 7 attributes. A chocham does not speak in front of someone who is greater than him. A chocham b'minyan ve'ina nichnas l'stochtiv v'chaveri. Doesn't interrupt his colleague. And he doesn't he doesn't answer impulsively, etc., etc. The 7 attributes of a chacham. Now the question arises normally when we contrast a chacham and the opposite of a chacham. Normally we say a chacham and a tipesh. Someone is a chacham, someone is a fool. Now here we say a chacham and a goylem. Why the use of the word goylem over here? Secondly, we find other descriptions of a chacham in other places. Chazal describe it differently. In the Tana himself, in Pirkei Avos, in Perek Dalet, says, "Ezeu chacham, haloin mikol adam." Who is a chacham? Someone is a chacham who learns from everybody. Ezeu chacham, haloin mikol adam. And the Brisa says, "Ezeu chacham is a rayis anoilad." The Gemara brings down that a chacham is someone who can answer him everywhere, or even in one masechta, different levels of a chacham, and here none of this is mentioned. And the Tana himself in Pirkei Avos, as was mentioned before, gives a different attribute to a chacham. Alayim mikol adam. So what does the Tana mean over here? What does he mean by saying ezeu chacham? Shiva dvorim b'goyim, shiva b'chacham. There's 7 attributes to a goyim and 7 to a chacham. Now he doesn't say zeu chacham. He says there are 7 dvorim b'goyim v'shiva b'chacham. There's 7 dvorim. What does he mean to say? And what is the difference between a zeu chacham and shiva dvorim b'chacham? Perhaps the pshat is as follows. And what we're dealing with over here in this Mishnah is not someone who has acquired chachma. We're not dealing with a Talmud chacham. We're not dealing with a Talmud chacham and someone you can ask him all over and he can answer, or someone you can ask him in one masech, then he can answer. We're not dealing with the Talmud chacham. We're dealing with a zeu chacham. There's 7 dvorim b'chacham. There's 7 character traits that a person must possess in order to become a Talmud chacham. We're not dealing with the Talmud chacham. It's not a zeu chacham. There is 7 devorim. There are 7 character traits that are prerequisites that are needed in order to become a Talmud chacham. The number 7, we know the number 7 represents a cycle. There's Siras Omer Shiva Shavuos. There's 7 weeks. A Shemitah is a cycle of 7 years. A Yovel is a cycle of 7 Shmitas. Rav Tzadok HaKohen says that we have, after Tisha B'Av, there's the Shiva de Nechamta. We have the 7 weeks of Nechama. The Shiva de Nechamta. He says that that is a cycle of 7 to prepare ourselves then for the Yom Neroim, for Tishrei, for the Yom Adin. 7 is a cycle. There's 7 dvorim, 7 attributes that a person has to become someone who is capable of becoming Talmud chacham. He's now someone who is a kli, a vessel that he can now retain chachma. The opposite of that is a goylem. Doesn't say tipesh, because we're not dealing with a Talmud chacham. We're not dealing with a wise person, and opposed to that, a fool. We're dealing with a person who has the character traits to become a Talmud chacham. Contrasting that is a goylem, which is a goylem means an unfinished keli. A goylem is something which is not completely finished. It's not fabricated completely. If you have a keli, a vessel, it's either completed, and now it can contain things, it can hold things, it can serve its designated function, and then you have goylmi kalim. You have goyme kelim, which are not completed, which are not finished. So what we're contrasting over here is there's 7 dvarim b'chacham, someone who has a capability of acquiring, retaining, and holding chachma. He has these character traits. And the opposite is a goylem. He is unfinished because he doesn't possess these character traits, so therefore he will not be able to absorb the learning, to absorb it, to internalize it, to retain it, because he's missing the fundamental character traits. And this is a process. And therefore, if one would ask the question, well, if you need 7 to become a chacham, and the opposite is a goylem, well, let's say a person has 4, let's say he has 3, let's say he has 5, is he a chacham or not a chacham? But the answer is, as mentioned, we're not dealing with a wise person. Ezeu chacham. What is a wise? Ezeu chacham arayis anoilad. A wise person is someone who can see what's going to happen, who see where things are leading, who can understand the future. That is a chacham, but we're not talking about a chacham here. It's not ezeu chacham. So therefore, if a person has all the 7 attributes, he's a finished keli. If he has none, he's completely unfinished. Anything in the middle, he's partially finished. He's partially finished. He's not a Talmud Chacham. He's not a Chacham. He's not a Tipesh. He is partially finished. To be a complete Keli, you need all 7. Because to become a Talmud Chacham, it's not only an intellectual exercise. It doesn't depend only on raw brain power. It's not like other fields. It's not like other disciplines. It's not like mathematics or science. The learning Torah is learning the Torah, the Dvar Hashem. And it depends on not only our brain power, but it depends also on our tchunas and nefesh. It depends not only on the kishroinus that we have, but it also depends on who we are. And in order to have the siyata d'shmaya, to be matzliach in avodas Hashem, to have that special siyata d'shmaya, to be matzliach in avodas Hashem, we have to possess special midas, special character traits. It's not only about the intellect. It's also about the tchunas and nefesh, about who we are. Comes to mind, Yedid Nefesh of mine. Yedid Nefesh of mine for many, many years, Rav Goyen, Rav Moshe Hachman Shlita, was a relative of Rav Noach Weinberg, Zecher Tzadik Lebrocha. So he told me once, Rav Moshe told me once, that he had a neighbor that was not from, and he put great effort in trying to be makar of him. Put so much effort in trying to be makar, to get him to be Shomer Shabbos, and he tried and tried, and he wasn't matzliach. One time Rav Noach came to town, and he asked his uncle, he asked Rav Noach, can you please speak to him? I'm trying and trying, I'm getting nowhere. So Rav Noach agreed, even though he had a busy schedule, he agreed. And in a very short manner of time, this person agreed to start to become Shomer Shabbos. And Rav Moshe was flabbergasted. He says, I don't know. He says, I've been working and I'm getting nowhere. And right away, in the matter of no time, you're makar of him. You have such special talent. You have such special kaychas. I wish I had these kind of kishroinus and talents that you possess. And Rav Noach said, no, that's not the case. He said, that's not the case. It's not special talents. It's not special skill. He says, when I was young, I didn't have any of the skills of communication. And I talked about Kiruv, and people laughed at me. And people called me a dreamer, and people were mavaza me. And how are you going to be makar of They looked at him and laughed and said, how are you going to change people's lives? How are you going to be... You don't possess any of the skills. You don't possess any of the talents. You have no skills in communication. How can you think and dream that you're going to do this? But he said he had the rosin. He had the overwhelming desire. That's what he possessed. He didn't possess great skills and talents. He possessed a will, a desire to be Oved Hashem, to encourage people to be Oved Hashem. And the Rebbeinu Hashem gave him Siyata D'Shmaya. In the matter of time, in the passage of time, these skills came. These extraordinary skills came. But he said they were from Siyata D'Shmaya as a result of his overwhelming desire. They were the midas, the Tchunas HaNefesh. That gave him the skills. He wasn't born, there were not skills he was born with. There were skills that developed, and he was given the Siyata D'Shmaya to develop because of the Tchunas HaNefesh that he had. Just to conclude with Rav Noach, just a personal maisa comes to mind with Rav Noach Weinberg. We had in Achenu, we had a Kiruv conference several years ago, where we brought together the leaders of Kiruv and tried to motivate some of the workers, the Pi'ilim, who were engaged in Kiruv, tried to give them direction and guidance. And we had workshops and motivational speeches. And one of the guest speakers, one of the main speakers, was Rav Noach Weinberg. And he came to this Kiruv conference. And it was a great schus to have him there. Sometime later, I got a call that Rav Noach was in town and he would like to meet me. So I assumed, of course, he had this huge financial burden carrying the Eshet Torah, Moistus, and probably was in town soliciting funds, and he very much wanted to meet me. So, of course, I agreed, and fully expecting that this is what the meeting was going to be about. Rav Noach, just to demonstrate his overwhelming desire for Kiruv, for Avodas Hashem, L'Shem Shamayim, he says, I got to know about Achenu, about the work of Achenu. How can I help Achenu further its goals? I was expecting him to turn to me to help Eshet Torah. And he, despite his busy schedule, his enormous burden, incredible burden that he was carrying with Eshet Torah, he was chasing and looking for me so that he could help Achenu further their Kiruv work. The Siyata D'Shmaya comes from the Tchunas HaNefesh, the desire to be Oved, the Rebbeinu